We are glad that you are all here. We are going to convene our first of 3 roundtables on the serious problem of sexual assault on college campuses. These roundtables will occur every 2 weeks for the next 6 weeks. Today, as you know, we're going to focus on the Clery and SAVE Acts and talk to you about the challenges that those rules and regulations present. 2 weeks from today, we'll cover Title IX. And then 4 weeks from today, we will cover both the administrative process, but it's been a great deal of focus on the criminal law enforcement process and where we're failing to get these perpetrators into the criminal justice system and what we need to do to improve our abysmal record in that regard. I thank all of you for being here. You were all invited because you are experts in various ways on this issue, and this is not a hearing, this is a conversation. The goal here, and I want to say for Senator Gillibrand and Senator Blumenthal, they are both very sorry they can't be here today. I'm sure they will be participating in the other roundtables we will have, but we're working on drafting legislation, and what we want to do is maybe simplify, because I know this is now a complex labyrinth of different rules between SAVE and Clery and Title IX, and different standards of proof, different state statutes. We don't even agree on the definition of consent. So those are challenges that I know this area represents, and we want to see if we can simplify, clarify, augment, support, perhaps provide more mandatory training, but with the grants that go with that, so that universities can access grants to help train people on campuses for important things like that initial forensic interview that we all know is crucial, that frankly, if there's one thing I could do by waving a magic wand, and that is making sure every victim at the moment of report is immediately seen to by someone who is trained that can do the type of interview that makes the difference between success and failure in terms of ultimately bringing someone to justice for a serious felony. As many of you know, I have already sent letters requesting detailed information from the Department of Justice and the Department of Education regarding their enforcement and oversight. I've also launched a survey of 450 colleges and universities regarding their policies and procedures relating to sexual violence. I'm holding these roundtables to hear from a variety of stakeholders regarding how they think we can best address this significant problem on college campuses. Today, as I said, we'll focus on Clery and Campus SAVE Act, 2 pieces of legislation which, among other requirements, mandate that schools collect and report information about sexual violence. These requirements are, in fact, a great start, but I'm concerned they haven't been adequately enforced. I also believe that we can do better to address this problem through this enforcement regimen. I'm a former prosecutor with years of prosecuting sexual assault crimes, and obviously that informs my approach to this problem. I want to know that survivors are getting the services they need and that perpetrators of sexual violence are being held criminally accountable. But I know that's not all that's required. I also want to make sure that whatever steps we take going forward are the right ones and that we respect the rule of law in this country, which includes due process. Let's start with the Clery Act. And maybe, Allison, you can start off. And all of these, everyone should just jump in. This is going to be a free-flowing discussion. The worst thing that could happen is for you to leave this room saying, I wish I would have told her this, or I wish I would have told them about this. We want to hear everything that frustrates you, everything that you think is working, everything that you think is problematic. You know, please don't hold back. The Clery Act, I think that, at least in some of the people I've talked to, I think it was originally envisioned that this would be data that people could rely on and that would be consumable by someone. The problem is now, I don't think anybody knows the data is even there. I mean, getting past the first problem, that it's not reliable. The second problem is that it doesn't appear to me to be out there where families even know that it exists. That this is something they could even ask for and find out what the data is on a campus. So, Allison, who do you believe the data is intended to be for?
Sure. So I would, and again, I just interviewed one of our founders, Connie Clery, recently for something separate, and we talked about the intention being to be forewarned is something that she talked so often about, to let people know when they're going to a campus what crimes have been reported on that campus. So for current students, prospective students, current employees, prospective employees. The other side to that, and you said to air anything that we had to air, so I will take that to heart, is that often how it plays out, if you have a campus, for example, that reports 60 sex offenses versus a campus that reports 0, the perception by the public is that that campus reporting 60 is unsafe, when in fact I would disagree with that campus reporting 60, and as a former prosecutor you certainly know, it's an underreported crime. So if students are coming forward and they're reporting and they're seeking help and they know where to go, they're getting the education to know that what happened to them, to know to call that sexual assault. So that's one of the challenges I see with the numbers. The annual security reports that campuses produce that are to be made public for families, for employees, are wonderful documents that provide summaries of policies. One of the other struggles I see is to check off the compliance box. Sometimes those documents are created and they have policy statements, so summaries, for example, of the sex offense policies, but then there's no complete policy behind it. Or if there is a complete policy behind it, that policy is not being implemented on the campus.
So how do we do better on the problem that if a college campus says they've had 0, that should be a real red flag to any parent, that means they are not reporting their statistics and don't take this problem seriously, as opposed to one that may have 60, which is counterintuitive. It may mean that they have a really robust program where they are accurately collecting data and victims feel comfortable coming forward. Does anybody have any ideas as to how we could get past that bump? Because that's going to be the problem. I mean, I think that is the problem now. I think that there is an incentive to not accurately report.
I think the White House actually already started addressing that. They called it a climate survey, but what they're really talking about is a victimization survey. We do have an underreported problem, and when we measure that and have that number at the top of the Clery chart saying there's 100 rapes here, and then have the number on the bottom be and only 5 are reported, that's how you contrast it. I mean, sexual violence is everywhere, and we need to get that understood. But I think when colleges have to face those numbers, that incentive is to have the 60, close that gap, as well as decrease victimization. And I know the White House is looking to implement that in 2016, but I think we start thinking about that now and how that works with Clery, because the challenge is Clery is geographically based and bound, and how does that work with victimization, which happens everywhere and between students, off campus and on campus.
So the answer to the Clery problem is maybe mandating, because the White House is talking about voluntarily doing climate surveys.
I'm very for mandating. I mean, they make you return books before you can get your diploma. They can figure out how to make students take a survey. And we need to be thoughtful about how the survey is framed. It can't just be like, were you raped, yes or no? It has to be the subtle method of, have you had an experience where you didn't want this to happen? Because when we force people to identify legally, you're going to see underreporting. I didn't know what happened to me was rape for a long time. I just thought it was my fault or something bad that happened. And it took me a long time to come to that realization. So the content of the survey also is an issue.
Content and probably how it's actually conducted. There's been a long history of victimization surveys in the United States, done by the Department of Justice. Do you have thoughts or recommendations on that in terms of people, sharing?
So one of the recommendations that I would encourage is that campuses who are doing surveys use validated instruments for those surveys so that we are able to compare from campus to campus the information that is coming out of these surveys in the ways that Clery, I believe, was intended to function.
So what you're saying is potentially education or DOJ would come up with a standard survey that everyone would use with standard language on the questions?
I would hope that we would come up with a core of standard information that would be able to be comparable from institution to institution, but also that institutions be able to adapt some portions of the survey so that they can actually measure some of the other kinds of interventions that are happening from campus to campus, that this serve not only as a tool for consumers to be able to use to compare data, but also as a learning instrument for the campus itself to be able to identify what practices are effective. And it is my hope that those kinds of measures will feed into the yawning gap of research and evidence on what are best practices for prevention as well as response on the college campus.
To state the painfully obvious, those surveys we need to be able to afford whoever responds to those surveys anonymity, confidentiality, so we can truly get at the heart of what's happening, because if anyone has an inkling that their identity is going to be revealed, they're not going to answer honestly, and the data is going to be useless.
I appreciate all of you being here very much. Please consider this an open channel of communication. We should have draft legislation done sometime after the last roundtable. We're working on it now, and obviously we'll anxiously await everyone's input to the draft and what we include and what we don't, but we're working on it collaboratively, and obviously it's really going to be informed by these roundtables. So I know I've got a lot of staff in this room today taking lots of notes, and all of that will be collated, and we'll look at all of it, and in light of the list of things we're talking about, legislating about, and hopefully come up with the right piece of legislation that will augment and improve what we have and empower survivors in a way that they have not been empowered before, with the right mix of regulation, support, and penalties.